YouTubers who made a lot of money by sheer randomness. What's your story? Story 1. In the Ninities, I fostered a dog for some friends who were leaving town and left the dog with me. This dog immediately made an impression upon me, and even though I really didn't want a pet at the time, he was such an amazing dog. He convinced me otherwise. He was super smart, half black lab, half pit bull. I called him Wisdom because he was so smart. Fast forward a few years, I used him as a mascot for a recording studio I set up. I registered the domain name wisdom.com. My dog passed away several years later, and I was heartbroken and depressed for many years. I maintained the domain name even though I didn't really have any projects associated with it. Over the years, people made offers on the domain name, but I always passed. The domain was a homage to my long-lost best friend. Then in 2000, with the .com boom, there was renewed interest in domains and IPOs. I had a few groups bugging me for the domain name and kept increasing their offers. Eventually, the numbers got into the life-changing areas of money, and I couldn't ignore them. I originally secured the wisdom.com domain name for nothing. In the early days of the internet, it didn't cost any money to register a domain name. You just had to fill out the right forms. I actually would never have to pay any domain renewal fees if it wasn't for a sysadmin that made changes to the domain and accepted new terms of service that forced me to have to pay renewal fees. Otherwise, the $475,000 I was ultimately offered in cash would have been pure profit. But instead, my cost was a few $100s over the year. Still a significant windfall that gave me the opportunity to take that money and create another cool community of wonderful people. I continue to be in awe that my little dog, Wisdom, had the ability to bestow such an amazing gift upon me so many years later, and I'm determined to use that gift to help others. I took the money to create a special space that is a makerspace and club to help others. Story 2. My neighbor died with no friends or family and left everything in her will to us. Everyone always asks if we were great neighbors to her. I'd say no. We were just neighbors and treated her as we would want to be treated and did neighborly duties for her. If it snowed, we cleared her driveway without her asking, took care of her cats if she went to the beach, and said hello if we saw her. She was a tough cookie, and an alpha female would be the best way to put it. She hated if I played basketball in the driveway, and when we were cleaning out her garage after she died, we found 3 of my old basketballs. But she was also the type of person, if she wanted an apple pie, she would bake an apple pie and take a slice and bring the rest over to us. Story 3. I once got a message from the site's admin. It asked if I wanted to do some contract work in my free time. Over the course of a few months, I made like $5,000 for browsing subreddits and categorizing them by topic and age rating. I didn't get to pick the subreddits I wanted to view, though. They'd send me a list of a few hundred subreddits, and I'd have to spend about 10 to 15 min on each sub. I'd check for certain things, fill out a Google Sheets form, and move on to the next sub. When I finished a full list, I'd email them to get a new one. It was a pretty sweet gig. I was a substitute teacher and a tutor at the time. So anytime a kid or a teacher canceled on me, I'd do my Reddit thing. Plus, it was an easy job to do while I was homesick or waiting for the repair guy to come to my house. Because I had no set hours, I just worked whenever I felt like it. Story 4. I started an Amazon private label business on a whim in 2015. I made about 25% of the sale and profit after product, shipping, and advertising costs. Sales doubled every month for 6 months: June $4,000, July $8,000, August $18,000, September $40,000, October $84,000, November $175,000, December $362,000. I didn't know what to do. I quit my job in January to focus on growing the business, but my time was spent mostly trying to fend off competition, copying my listing, and posting fraudulent reviews, and then lowering my price in the race to the bottom. It went well for a few years, but I never made as much as I made that first December. Lesson learned. Arbitrage isn't a long-term business. Story 5. I was the victim of housing discrimination, and the morons put it in writing. They literally sent me an email explaining they wouldn't rent to me because of illegal discrimination reason. Had they just not sent the email, they would have been fine. Nobody would have known they'd rejected my application for a bad reason. It's okay to reject applications for a wide variety of reasons. If they'd chosen a fake one, or even given no explanation at all, they wouldn't have found themselves in legal trouble. I made a complaint to my state, and the state assigned a free lawyer to handle it. I didn't even know they'd do that. Anyway, the people kept lying and saying I was making shit up. They insulted my character in a wide variety of ways that went way beyond the issue at hand. Think stuff like claiming I was faking, reason they discriminated in the first place. So how could they discriminate against something I was faking? It was just ridiculous. In the end, I wound up with a decent-sized check. Again, when I reported them, I thought I'd never learn the result of what the state would decide to do. I was just reporting a broken law. But the best part was that the lawyer asked me if I wanted them to have to take an anti-discrimination class, because, if I did, the state would include that in the punitive measures. I did. The class was 2 hours away from them in the constant traffic of our area, and I liked imagining them having to sit there in some ugly, depressing room while being educated about why they were shitty people and needed to stop being shitty. Story 6. My great-aunt and godmother was a lesbian. Her partner, my Auntie Kitty, had been with her since the 1950s when my godmother moved to New York City to work as a magazine photographer. Auntie Kitty was disowned by her family when it came out she was with a woman. My godmother died when I was 12 and left my Auntie Kitty everything in her will, which made things strained with my dad's family, though my dad and one of his brothers still talked to her. I moved to New York at 18 for school, and knowing no one else in the city, we became close. She was thrilled that I wanted to have a relationship with her and spend time with her, and didn't hesitate to think of her as my aunt, even though she technically wasn't. She was legit the greatest, and we spent holidays together, and she would come to things I worked on, and I knew all her friends, and she knew mine. I basically spent a decade with her being like another grandmother to me. As she got older, she'd repeatedly remind me I was the executor of her will, that I was to follow it to a T, and none of her family was to get anything. I got the bulk, my dad and uncle got some, and my sister and my nieces a little. I knew the woman had money. She had a vacation home in the Carolinas and a brownstone in NYC, but since they were bought in the 70s, I figured outside of real estate, there wasn't much. I was very wrong, and inherited enough that potentially I wouldn't have to work ever again if I didn't feel like it. Story 7. I was celebrating my 20th birthday. Decided to go to the nice casino an hour away from campus with my then boyfriend. We played bingo because that's what I could afford, and it took some time. We lost. I called my dad. He loves casinos when he has the money to go. He told me to play 3-card poker. I had watched him play before, but I didn't know how and was on my last $20 to my name. He told me that would be enough for a hand or two, and just give it a shot. The dealer would explain the rules. So I sat at the table by myself. I won. The dealer was really excited for me, but I was pretty clueless. I had a straight flush. Then I just kept winning. People would take the seat in front of me. They would lose. I'd win. Didn't matter. Got 2 more straight flushes that night, and lots of other good hands. I kept betting the minimum, wishing I was putting down more. I turned $20 into 3 that night. My dad didn't believe me. Story 8. My friend's father was given an oil pencil drawing in the late 70s. His family always assumed it was pretty much worthless, and I always joked that it looked like my friend had drawn it as a child. This still angry stick figure drawing ended up being an unsigned piece of art by Jean-Michel Basquiat. His family did some digging and eventually had it authenticated by the JMB estate before selling it at Christie's auction house for an amazing sum of money. I was absolutely blown away when I learned this. My friend and his family were far from wealthy, so to realize they had this unknown treasure just sitting out in the living room for so many years was mind-blowing. Story 9. One time when I was like 15, I heard a story on ESPN about how a Tiger Woods rookie card that was published by SI for Kids magazine had sold for like $100,000. I had subscribed to SI for Kids around that time and spent part of that afternoon looking through old boxes for that issue. Lo and behold, I found the issue with a page of perforated cards perfectly intact. It wasn't perfectly centered, and I didn't want to risk detaching it and ruining something, so I put the whole magazine on eBay. Sold it for $500, which felt like a small fortune at the time. I felt like a king that day. Edit. Like one card ever went for that much, and it was graded a perfect 10. Then everyone realized it was an option and looked for their card from their magazine. Supply quickly outstripped demand. By the time I listed, most people were getting like $100, $300. The $500 I got was well above average when it sold. Mine also would never have graded even close to a 10 because it was off-center. Sorry, I should have explained that up front to avoid looking like a total fool. Story 10. I built a motorcycle back in 2011. Pretty well all the parts on it I built. Took it to a few rallies, few shows, made its way around the internet, some magazines, had a ton of people ask if I sold this part or that part. So I started in my garage. Sold about 10,000 parts out of there over the span of 2 years. Bought a shop, more equipment, and started automating my processes. Friend that owns a business that supplies stuff to practically every nuclear plant in the world pops in one day. Asks me to design a connector for a surveillance system they sell. Took a day, had the prototype done. Cut out around 20 minutes on each individual camera installation and required no tools. They sold a F-ton of those. Then jumped into radiation shielding. Big fin money in that. It's been nearly 10 years now. Sell thousands upon thousands of bike parts that I designed and built every year. Travel to motorcycle events all over. Generally have a blast. I'm 31. Pretty well have the financial freedom to go do whatever I want. Story 11. I was in a car accident when I was 5. About $250,000 in medical bills. My parents' insurance company and my grandfather, who is a lawyer, went after the other dude's insurance company. We also got awarded punitive damages to the tune of 3-to-1 of medical bills. Because it's a court-ordered settlement in the particular state, I don't pay taxes on it. I am now 23. I have gotten a payment every year now since I was 18. The actual value when I was 18 was about $560,000. I have paid for my college and will have the remainder of the money by the time I'm 27. I can effectively contribute nothing to my retirement, and I will likely retire a millionaire. At the time, it was terrible. I was near death for about 18 hours and in surgery, but now I am perfectly healthy and have only minor scarring on my face. All told, I count myself very fortunate for not only surviving, but also having a nice nest egg. Story 12. My wife and I got some stock options when the part of the company we worked for spun off from a much larger corporation. They weren't worth much when we got them. This was the 90s though, and every tech stock was going up. Eventually, we jokingly decided that we'd sell when the stock price got high enough to pay off the house. After we paid the taxes, well, one day, right before we were about to leave on vacation, it got there. We briefly thought about holding out for more, but nope, we cashed out and left. In the 2 weeks we were gone, the stock price surged up and then crashed, never to see those levels again. In fact, the stock crashed below $1. The company did a 10-to-1 reverse split. I think they did this twice. It eventually went below $1 again, and the stock was delisted. Funny thing is that a lot of our friends told us we were crazy to sell. One friend even exercised his options when we did, but put the proceeds into the stock market without having saved any money aside for taxes. We did really well on the deal, but it was a combination of luck and our combined conservative fiscal nature.